Wanted to give a special shout out today to Maslow, a local Seattle DJ and producer here who made our new podcast intro song. So if you get a chance, go look on Instagram or SoundCloud for Maslow Makes. Show you here real quick. You can find him across all social media as Maslow Makes. But once again, special thanks to Maslow for making our new intro soundtrack. Without further ado, let's go and get to the podcast. Welcome, folks, to the Knights of the Wrong Table podcast. As always, I'm John.
I'm Randall.
And we have a special guest joining us today, Alex. Alex, thank you for being on.
Nice to meet you,
Thanks
Alex.
for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, fantasy for me this week, there is a chance because Aaron Rodgers didn't do too hot last night against, who am I playing? Slightly less low expectations. Who's that, Randall?
That's Christopher. He's a good friend of ours from California.
That's
he
right,
is the former champion. He's last year's champion, the incumbent.
Who I lost to in the final.
Yeah,
So,
that's the one who beat you last year for the championship.
well, I have Teddy McLaurin coming off an injury, and I have Zach Ertz, and he's got the Kansas City defense. So there is a small chance if Washington can pull a win off against Kansas City that I
think that small chance is about 2% according to the metrics here.
That's
So
what it says.
98% chance you should get comfortable for a loss this week.
This week I had Garrett Wilson, Drake London, both out, and Malik Neighbors is on my squad. Plus, I had Michael Penix, who's my backup QB,
out too this week. Yeah,
out too. So I had to start Mac Jones, and I'm projected to win by like 50 points. So
hey, I was up on the mountain all weekend, turkey hunting, deer hunting, just doing outdoor things, and I happened to drive through a split-second highway where there was just a little bit of internet, and I got a text message that said, like a fantasy update message that said Lamar Jackson's out, and I was like, oh no, I have him in. So then I started driving around trying to find where I got that reception so I could change Lamar Jackson out. And I think
you were laughing at you the whole time.
Well, yeah. I put in Chase Brown, who ended up getting me 22 points. So I was stoked. I was like, hell yeah. And then I look and I'm still going to lose by like 15. So that sucks.
I did that this week without a quarterback too. I don't know if you saw that because in our league, Alex, it's a 12-person league with a super flex, so 2 quarterback league. So there's
most often what people run is 2 quarterbacks, unless you got some stud running back squad or something.
Yeah. So yeah, I started Ewers, the Miami backup, just in case Tua went down with a concussion or something. But then I picked up for next week. I should have 2 quarterbacks again next week, which is nice.
Our league is one of the most cutthroat leagues because not only do injuries matter, but also there's no waivers. So as soon as someone goes down, you better hope you have his backup. Otherwise, some vulture will pick up his backup and drop some nobody.
Absolutely.
So is it a full dynasty league then?
No, it's not a dynasty league. We do a redraft every year, but it's just cutthroat and injury ridden. And like I started the season 5-0, and I quickly now have become 6-2 or 6-1, whatever it is.
Got your first loss against me, buddy.
Yeah, you hit speed bumps pretty quickly. Like when you said when you lost Neighbors and then you lose some wide receivers, those kind of things happen, and then all of a sudden your whole season. The goal of our season is make playoffs. If you can make playoffs, you have a shot. Yeah,
Definitely an attrition game in our league for sure.
Absolutely. And then we got deep benches too. So we're looking at, when you're looking at the waiver wires, you're looking at nobody's hoping, well, maybe they'll go off at the end of the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, I should get a loss this week as well. I happened last week. I know we didn't happen to have the time to do an episode last week. I was out of town down in California for work.
And we were giving listeners a chance to catch up too. So.
All that too. But I ended up pulling a win out of the skin of my teeth by 0.6 points. 110.9 to 110.3 or something like that.
Who'd you play last week?
No. This week is my wife. Last week was my buddy Isaac out of Toronto, Canada. There's a Canadian or one Canadian friend in the league.
And then can we just have a moment of silence real quick if we're talking about Canada for the Seattle Mariners? A quick moment of silence in their playoff bid. Yeah.
I've seen some pretty hilarious memes though about that whole end of that situation.
Well,
There's
I mean,
some really funny ones.
What are you going to do when you have multiple bats that are batting around, point, 150, 160? You're not going to win the World Series. We didn't deserve to be there. So not with those bats like that.
That's a hot take. That's going to be hotter than any takes we take today. Man, I think we were favorite. We were going all the way, man. I don't think that we have any business going up against the Dodgers, but that's
the big argument with guys
you're not going to win the World Series with that many bats like that. So
the big argument with guys like Cal is he would hit big homers or he would strike out. He didn't have a good on base percentage. And if you're not having guys that can get on base, like that was the problem with Seattle is they would hit really good one day and they'd win by 8 runs, or they would just get the shit kicked out of them. They didn't have a lot of get a guy on base.
Come on,
and
what's
hit
your take? What's your take, Alex?
Oh man, I think the Seattle Mariners were in for a striking World Series to take all. But
they also weren't set up very well with their pitching staff in this late run here.
Yeah, they lost Brian Wu, but he came back in relief for a couple games. But yeah, I'm an optimist. So when they're like, anytime they win afterwards, I'm like, World Series. It's the same with the Seahawks. Seahawks win in like a game. I'm like, Super Bowl. Easy.
Seahawks are looking good though. Seahawks are looking good this year. So
it's almost scary because they have us at like, a top 5 team in the league. I never like to see that. I want to be the underdogs.
One of the great memes I saw or shorts I saw, short videos was like, look at this catch from Jackson Smith and Jigba, and it had Sam Darnold rolling back, throws the pass, and Jigba goes up to take the catch, and then all of a sudden it's boom, 3-1 shot by Toronto, and it's just like, oh man,
I'm not ready for it yet.
Oh, those are brutal.
Let me grieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So before we get really started into our topic here, I wanted us to kind of set some norms or precedents, just so because we are going to talk about some heavy topics today. We're going to have some religion topics and where we come from. And I think to set the stage a little bit for our viewers, it would be important so it doesn't come across like we're criticizing from the outside, that we actually come from that community. And I'll go first here as far as what we're going to talk about. So I was baptized in the Catholic Church when I was a child. And then I grew up in, if you want to say, a non-denominational / Pentecostal rooted church. And I do not still go to the church today, or any church today. And I did study religion at PLU, minored in religion at PLU.
So I was born and raised into the Lutheran faith. I was confirmed when I was in my early teens. Do not still go actively to a church, but I'm still definitely actively still in contact with my pastor. And my family kind of broke away from the church, as it were, like for community reasons. We had a disagreements with a lot of people that were there, and the pastor that was really good friends with my family was moving on to a different area of California. She's an immigrant from Germany, so she's very well in tune with Lutheranism in Germany. That's how it brought me to Pacific Lutheran University. I got a scholarship being a confirmed Lutheran going there. I also minored in religion. I have a history degree, but I studied abroad and did a theological class in Cambridge University, Jesus College, Cambridge University in England. Definitely religious in the sense of history, and religious in the sense of religious archaeology. Always been a big topic for me. But when it comes to like active practicing, it's much more relationships with people that I can get advice from, like my pastor.
Yeah, I grew up in the Lutheran Church. Is kind of where we started, and then for the better part, and was baptized as an infant as a Lutheran. But really when I started actively going to church, or when I felt like it was kind of something for me, was more in a non-denominational church that was like a non-denominational evangelical church that played all of the Hillsong music, had like Rick Warren, Andy Stanley, kind of trying to go down those lanes of things. And then when I was probably in high school, decided that I would get baptized again for my theological reasons of not believing in my infant baptism anymore. And so that's kind of the background of where, and I went and I was on staff of that church for a few years, and then we planted a church, an Acts 29 church, if you know anything about Mars Hill and all that. So kind of in that vein of things was where I ended up. Um, and then also I went to UW Tacoma and had my degrees in American Studies, but was an emphasis in religion. If they had a double major or minor, it would be in that. So I took 6, 7 classes in religion, philosophy of religion as well.
Sweet.
So
Yep. Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you again for being here. So we have on here Alex today, who is a husband, father of 2 girls, and the senior director of operations for a commercial real estate brokerage. Alex holds a degree in American Studies with an emphasis on American religion. He's currently earning a certificate in commercial real estate from the University of Washington as well. He grew up in the world of evangelical megachurches, kind of like you heard, later serving in both the youth ministry and worship leadership roles. Over the years, his faith and worldview have evolved, leading him to explore how religion, morality, and modern life all intersect outside traditional church settings. He brings a thoughtful, balanced perspective, someone who's passionate about finding common ground across political and theological divides, and about building empathy in conversations that often get polarized. And I kind of mentioned this before when we were talking off camera a little bit, is one of the questions that I didn't write to you, but I wanted to ask because it begs to ask the question, do you think that you're risking anything being here today? And we're asking that because I feel like we've already been making noise. We started this podcast. My social media platform already kind of knows how I feel. We've been making noise, so we don't really care, but we wanted to see how you felt about being here today.
yeah, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think that for the most part, of friends that know me, family that knows me, kind of see where I'm at, where I have been, and probably where I'm headed as well. So I wouldn't think that there would be any risk associated with it. And if there was, I would welcome the risk.
Heck yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's my opinion doesn't matter, but that's what I like to hear. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So thank you for coming on today. So I guess, could you explain to the listeners at home kind of your worldview growing up versus today from a general perspective, just to kind of get the conversation going with you?
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying in the bio, and kind of as I explained earlier, like I grew up in a very conservative evangelical household, and the kind of things that I think of through that pushed my worldview was very like black and white thinking. Like we're right, we hold the truth, and other people are wrong. And I think because of that, as I look at it, we wouldn't say that outright, obviously. Like it was framed in a way that we want to go out and help people, but because of that, it was like, we're right, you're wrong. And so I think just kind of that perspective framed a lot of how I lived, how I acted, and then kind of maybe my posture towards others. More so in the background, though. Like I wouldn't say that out front, but there was a certain kind of there was almost a motive in loving people or caring for people or going out of my way to help someone that I wouldn't necessarily have today. And I think part of that also comes into play is this idea of like certainty. Like I was so certain of what I believed. I was so sure that it was what it was. And I think that as I kind of look at today, there's aspects of that I actually like miss and I grieve. Like when I first kind of started to unravel my worldview and my thought of who I thought Jesus was and this religion that I believed in, it was scary to lose that certainty and what I thought was real and what I thought was true and what was going to happen when I died, and to like always have something to point back on for my big T truth that I needed.
Yeah. That rings with me too. You said that you kind of like the yearning for almost how things were, or the comfort, right? Like
Yeah.
there's something comfortable in feeling like you're right. I know that I kind of talked about my woke point when we started this podcast, or my woke point politically and with religion too, was really working with refugee children, working with refugee students. And, it's just, you can't tell me just because someone hasn't potentially heard the word that they're
Yeah.
damned. So and then it just hits you in the face. You just look at these kids and you can't talk politics in the face of these kids. And I say politics because it's the politics of that religion, right? Like there is definitely the political motivation behind the proselytizing. Is that the word? The what's the word I'm looking for here, guys? Help me out here, Randall.
I think you just mean like politicizing, right?
Well, so I'm saying no, like, so every interaction is about interactions are about getting people into the church. Interactions are about kind of trying to be you're a missionary all the time, right? You're
Yeah, the
trying to
end
get
the end
people
goal
into
of
the faith all the time.
Christianity is to spread the good word of the Lord and to convert the masses.
Yeah.
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 Well, and it's because hell's hot and forever's a long time. Like that's what they would say. But the hard part about that is that like, so that comes, I would say, from like good intentions. To your point of like politicizing it, like they have some kind of like motive or goal, and that's what I would say too when I was in it. Um, and I think those are good intentions because you want to save people from this eternal damnation. But at the same time, when you put that into reality, like, do we actually think that? Do you actually think that this person who like is a really good person that's lived like a full life but just hasn't like their one sin that Jesus can't forgive is the sin that they don't believe in him? Like that seems pretty intense to me.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's interesting to look at when you look at American history specifically with like the eye on religion. This country is obviously founded with like the mindset of a freedom of religion that you can choose, what you want to express, but there's an underlying tone of Christianity throughout American religion and American government. And like even on the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your poor huddled masses yearning to learn, become free." And that's always been kind of a political football is those constituents, those poor huddled masses in the United States. And frankly, in the past like 8 to 10 years, I feel like a lot of that has become more of a chance to get political points and use political argument rather than actually help those people that this country in the past was always kind of built upon helping. um in like the early 1920s, 1930s, there were a lot more social welfare programs that were out to help the poor, the disenfranchised, the immigrant communities. And a lot of those immigrant communities are of the same religion as what these people are in the United States who would claim to help them. But I feel like a lot of Christians want to get seen helping rather than do the helping specifically. And that's kind of become a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And then Alex, I think you said it a little bit you kind of mentioned wanting to go back to that comfort. And then, right, when you kind of have this bit of a spiritual awakening in a sense, kind of coming out of the church, you're an adult, you see things through your own lens. How would you say that your past helped you in your adult life? And then how would you say maybe even you felt like you had room to grow because of your experience and your upbringing?
Yeah. I like the idea of that too. Because the way that you frame it with how it helped me first in the circles that I've tended to run in the last few years, like the focus is on how the church has harmed you. And I mean, the church has done a lot of harm. And so I don't want to downplay that, but I do appreciate that it's framed around the good because I do think that there is, and there has been like a massive influence of good, like compassion and empathy and having like I would like to think that I have like a tilt and a lean towards compassion and mercy towards people because of my background in church. Like, regardless if, like we've talked about already, of kind of like this eternal mindset that it has, which can be good and bad at the same time. But there also is like a massive element of like do good. And like you look at the teachings of Jesus and talking about like loving your enemies, loving your neighbor. And who is your neighbor? Your enemy. Like looking at the story of the Good Samaritan and seeing that it is like these people that should help you and they walk by, and the Samaritan comes and picks you out and puts you in the inn and pays for your stay there and make sure that you're okay. And that's who that we should go and be like them. So I think that that massive like emphasis towards compassion and mercy has been a huge role. And then I think just there's like I think that there's still like an overall net good for the church. We Even with my like changing worldviews, the church that I grew up with, it's a mega church down the road. Like we've talked about going back there again for my kids' sake and thinking of like this sense of community that I had growing up, and sense of belonging and sense of like other people that although we might not, I don't agree with them theologically and even their like overall like worldview, which is the hardest part that I'm trying to get past with it.
Right.
But like I want my kids to still be around that, and I still think that it would be an overall net good for them to be there.
Yeah.
I think in the same sense, like where is it hurt is that, the same church that I went to, uh, trying to like help me. I was on staff there. They asked me my opinion. There was a staffing change and asked me my opinion on it. And I told them that I didn't agree with it at the time. And they brought up a person at every church service and said, "Hey, there's some people that have come into my office and told me that this guy isn't the right person for the job, and they're not doubting me, they're doubting God, and their bodies will be floating down the river." It's like, okay, well, that's not like, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to like get behind your guy. But that's not helpful. So that's like a way that the church has hurt me. But I think that there's a specific type of person that it takes to be able to go up on stage on a Sunday or whatever day your church service is and speak to hundreds or thousands of people and be like, I'm the voice of God to you guys today. Listen to what I have to say. Like, I think there's a specific ego there. And so I think that's why you see so many mega churches go through these same cycles, that it's not, it's not a isolated issue at one mega church. It's something that happens throughout. So.
Right, for sure. Just that. Yeah, and you kind of touched on it with the worldview, right? Like if you're essentially going to be the voice of God for those, half an hour to an hour, however long a church service is, you kind of want to hope that you have some worldview in a line with that person up there speaking, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
That can be dangerous in its own right, because it can just reinforce, your own opinions and beliefs, and that's how you get kind of stuck in that sphere of influence where you're surrounded by it. Sometimes
true.
you
Yeah.
do want to disagree with the people up there.
Yeah. And I think that's the same thing. Like, and that's what I think social media does right now, is you just get sucked into this echo chamber where like
Echo chamber, there you go. That's the word I was
the
looking for.
more that you hear it, the more it's just reinforced. Like, this is what I think. And then you just hear it again and again and again. And so you're not
That's the path to radicalization,
Yeah, you're not hearing a different perspective. And so I think like if I put out my biases of where I would lean towards, it's almost like I want to lean towards like whatever you're saying. Like my default is like, what's the opposite of what they're saying? Like, how can I like bring up a different perspective? And it can hurt sometimes though, because then I'm not like giving my actual opinion, because I'm always just like thinking, what's the other perspective? Like, what is this person not seeing?
And so, Alex, you mentioned kind of maybe, you look at the good that it did do in your life with, being brought up in the church, and kind of something that you would want then for your children potentially. So does that mean, as of right now, do you guys still go to church today or no?
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't go as often as maybe we would like. But we go to a church in Tacoma called Garden City, and I think part of it, the biggest thing that they have there is like this worldview. They talk a lot about like we're not trying to build fences, we're building wells. So often, like I think what a church does is often they're trying to like build this fence, and they have a gate, and they're gatekeeping like who's in and who's out, and they're creating this like us versus them, and they don't. Again, I've tried to give people like the benefit of the doubt and good intentions on things. So they're not like trying to maybe do that intentionally, but they are creating this who's in, who's out, and it naturally happens. And so what Garden City kind of just talks about is like, we're trying to build a well. We're not trying to fence people in and say, this is us and there's them. But we're going to build a well, and we're going to say like the things that we value, and we're going to point out even the good in other things. But we think that people will be drawn into this well instead of trying to like build a fence or a gate around what we're doing.
Yeah. Or people floating down a river in the words
Yeah.
that you said there. Like, what
Or
the heck?
Yeah, or floating down the river. So,
An excellent
but
choice for an analogy to use the well. Not only does it draw everyone in, but even especially in the biblical sense, the well was a communal point. It's a place where people would specifically meet. So it's an apt choice. Well done by them. Hats off to them for that selection.
yeah, and I think the other thing too is that like I would say that like I often doubt if I believe in God. Like I'm not sure what I believe for the most part. And so they would also say, I think at times they'd be like, yeah, we're not sure either, and that's okay. Like they're not making some kind of like strict thing. Like I serve on the worship team still and play music there, and it's not like, oh, you don't believe this specific doctrine, so you're not able to do that.
So then I'm going to play a little clip for you here of a politician that you may know, James Tallarico. Let me get it pulled up here. Do you think that we'll watch the clip and then I'll ask you the follow-up question? We don't have a Jamie pull that shit up guy, so.
Commandment.
Keep the Sabbath.
Part of keeping the Sabbath holy is not working on the Sabbath.
That is, yeah,
What day is the Jewish Sabbath?
it is on Saturday.
And what day is it today?
It is Saturday. Here we are.
The Christian Sabbath is what day?
Sunday in honor of the day that Jesus rose from the dead.
And we're scheduled to give this bill a final vote on what day of the week?
It's ironic, isn't it?
Would you be willing to postpone your bill so that we're not breaking the Ten Commandments by working on the Jewish or Christian Sabbath?
I love that you said that because
You're saying that you'd rather tell people to follow the Ten Commandments than follow it yourself?
I would have rather have had this bill passed the other day when it was time.
We as a legislature are about to force every teacher in the state to post the Ten Commandments in their classrooms.
If
Do
they are
members
donated.
of the Texas legislature follow the Ten Commandments?
So again, this bill is about honoring our historical, educational, and judicial heritage with the displaying of the Ten Commandments.
The ninth commandment is thou shalt not bear false witness. Are you aware of any legislators who have lied about anything?
Boom.
That is,
Damn.
you know, there might be one coming up in a minute if you keep talking. We'll see.
The seventh commandment is thou shalt not commit adultery.
Yes.
Do you think that members of the legislature should focus more on trying to follow the Ten Commandments rather than telling others to follow them?
So yeah, that's kind of, I know that when I first saw that, I was like, goddamn, someone who, I was like, if that guy is preaching somewhere, like I want to go see that guy. You know, I want to see someone like that who just feels like just in a world where stuff is kind of so corrupted, I feel like it's just a voice of reason sometimes. Just, you know, I don't know. What's your take?
Yeah, I think for me, one, I would like very strongly agree with what he's saying there. My only like hesitation is and I think I'll frame it with I think that there's a part of it that is like political theater in some sense, that like
Yeah.
this is how we like have to do it to kind of get our points across. My only thing would be is that I think that it almost pushes towards like my criticism of the right oftentimes, and not to with current events with Charlie Kirk, but I think that those are the things that my biggest like criticism in that, maybe surprisingly, is that I don't like how people talk to people when they're trying to make their point. Like I want to have the value of all humans, and not, devalue them in it. And so I wouldn't say he's maybe devaluing her, but he's like trying to do it in like a gotcha moment. And I think that's what Charlie Kirk did as well. And so I'm not a huge fan of doing stuff that way. I think the best way to do it is like, and obviously I'm not him. He's doing it far better than I, but like find common ground. We both agree, like to some sense, of the 10 Commandments. Do we think this is the best way to go about this and try to find common ground rather than almost like getting a gotcha moment and like making her look silly, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, true. Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. And definitely Randall and I have talked ad nauseum about how, Charlie Kirk was definitely did some rage baiting and some cunning a cunning tongue for sure. So yeah, when I look at someone like James, I know it's just refreshing to see kind of the lens of the worldview, right? Because it does seem like he is someone who, genuinely is like, wait, maybe we shouldn't be taking healthcare away from millions of people. Maybe this is going to cause some issues, rather than just being whole steadfast of holding the Bible in one hand while trying to pass legislation that's going to entirely ignore Jesus's teachings. So
I think it's important to remember too where that discussion was happening. It's not so much of a gotcha moment when Texas state legislature is changing laws actively because they're being held by Republican state representatives in a Republican controlled state. So really the Democratic congressperson who was just speaking has no power really over anything that's going to happen. This law is going to get shoved down their throats whether they want to or not. But he's using his minutes that are logged and are taken down to express the hypocrisy that's happening. So that hypocrisy on her end is going to be written down in that legislature for those minutes. So I think it's important that they do those moments, because like you said, it shows the grandstanding, as it were, when you get up on a stage and you stand in front of people and you profess to want to help your local community and help your local poor people, your local immigrant community, and then you get up there and then when it comes to making decisions, you're doing things that's directly confrontational to what you do. And the Republican Party alone, I think, is like 80% evangelical vote, white Protestants votes for Republican. So I mean, they kind of are held between a rock and a hard spot. You either act the most evangelical you can because you're trying to outcompete the other guy who's running against you in a primary, who's going to act just as evangelical, if not more. So you better get up there and grandstand. And then when you say things like that, you're going to say things that are incredibly hypocritical, and that's where you get caught. Because I highly imagine that someone was running against her for her seat, and she had to out Republican that person. So she had to out religious. She had to win that 85%
out evangelical them. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the thing, is it's set up a self-fulfilling cycle where you have to be the most in order to win that seat. And in that case, you're going to elect someone who's just a buffoon.
Yeah. And I think even like more recently, as like the government shut down this week and looking at food stamps, like I saw a post this morning on a mega church pastor talking about shouldn't, as evangelicals, we should be going out of our way and supporting a way to figure out how to continue food stamp programs as the government shut down. And his point was, no, we shouldn't, because the government isn't the vessel and the means that we should be using in order to do this. And so we have a massive, food pantry at our church. But my thing with that is like, I don't think we see Jesus talking about like the vessels and then how we should do it. Like, we're really gonna to pick and choose and say, okay, this is like a great means and vessel in order to help the poor and help these programs. I think if those programs were not needed because the church was stepping up enough that they weren't needed, then I would be on board for it. But until the church does that, I don't think it's an efficient way to be able to go about and call out that.
You're hitting the nail on the head with something that I remember from my childhood, which is the vessel or the means to be taking care of those in need, right? And that's how people in my family, I would call them like Christian nationalists light, like diet Christian nationalists. Like, they want to get away with their vote because they're like, well, like, our taxes shouldn't be doing this, like we have tithing through the church and the church should be potentially doing this, yada, yada. But then I look at it too. It's like, yeah, is the church really doing that? Like, are they really opening their doors wide open and doing that, right? And like you mentioned the term gate versus, I don't know what you said for your current church, but
Yeah, well,
yes, the well. So a lot of churches are a gate. So it's like, yet you want to vote conservative and you want to potentially vote to take, food off of people's plates, but then it also functions as a gate and not a well. So it's like, we're just stuck here with like, okay, well then what are we even doing? We're an exclusive club, right?
yeah.
We're a club, and I'm gonna ruffle some feathers with this, but and then you see it for the networking, right? You see people using it for networking, not really using it for community. And I mean, you could say that the networking is a byproduct of the community, but you can't tell me that a lot of people haven't gotten very wealthy from using the church network, which is also, it's tough. It's a tough thing for me to reconcile, and it's a tough thing for me to ever want to go back. Like, I feel like there's like a yearning of, I do maybe want to bring my kids into the church, but then I also say, then at what cost, right? Because there's good that comes from it, but it's not without its negatives as well. So
I think the American church system has really, in all facets, become kind of bastardized from its original perspective. Where you look at, Jesus would preach, to the poor rather than to the wealthy. Why? Because the poor need it the most. Or like there's the story of the woman, giving her 2 pennies when that's all she can afford, and there's a guy who gives a bunch because he's looking for the grace of being so
the favor,
philanthropic, and Jesus honors the woman with the 2 pennies because it meant more to her. And so like there's that in the Bible. Then you can look at, Jesus himself. He was a progressive. In his day, he was literally against conservatism,
he's a
which would have been
progressive
the Jewish
left-leaning
church.
lunatic.
Like he would have been seen as a left-leaning lunatic. So
Yeah.
so then when you look at American culture on the church, and it's like, well, we want to bring money into the church, and you want to be successful, so you want to go to church so you can network, so you can get in and make good amount of money. Like, it's just kind of crazy thinking. And then it's like, well, who's this message going to be preached to? And is it going to be taught to the wealthy, or is it going to be taught to the people who need the message? And it's just kind of backwards from a lot of the ideals of what I think when I think of original historical inspired teaching and historical inspired means and what you're supposed to get out of it.
Yeah, but I would maybe push back a little bit. Do you think that do you think that's the goal of the church? Do you think it's almost like I would say like a byproduct of what happens? But I think everyone has multiple motives when they come out almost anything. So it's like I can't say that every time I do something, my motives are completely pure in that. But like, I would like to think that they are. And so in some sense, it's like, what do we think and I think this can filter into a lot of discussion. What do we think the actual theological framework that that we can point to is? Is it the masses? Is it the actual congregants there? Does that identify what the theological framework is, or is it the pastor, what they're trying to actually push forward? Because I think that there is a disconnect between what is happening in church culture and maybe what church scholars and even some pastors are trying to get and preach.
I think a
And
lot
those
of
are
it.
those are good and bad too.
I think a lot of it has to do with the size of the congregation you're speaking with. Um, Personally, I again, I don't want to speak for anyone else's religions, but personally, I don't really believe that the end motive for some of these mega churches, like a Kenneth Copeland, that
Yeah.
guy. I don't believe that the end result of his his reasons for doing it is to bring betterment to his congregation. I think that there's money, and there's a lot of Kenneth Copelands out there. And so, like, I think that when you have a larger size congregation, you open yourself up to that internal corruption. Like even before, like, just the idea in my mind, and maybe it becomes just because I'm a Lutheran, but in the idea in my mind that someone's up on a stage speaking for God, or like they're the voice of God, or like they're the conduit for you for God. Bullshit, you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it just opens that door. It's the same kind of argument that I feel like that a lot of conservatives have towards socialism and communism, is like, well, it's so ripe with corruption, you know, and the larger the size of your congregation, you could argue, you know, the more outreach you have, and the more ability you have to solve problems around the world. But at the same time, I feel like there's enough problems in a lot of local communities. And the smaller the church, the better. The more intimate you have a relationship with your religious leader, the more intimate, you know, the more connected you are in that type of mindset. Because in my mind, a religious leader too is just a mentor. There's someone that can kind of show you things or teach you things that you didn't previously have a way to scope about your actual problem that you're dealing with, rather than like an end all or a lawgiver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do. So your question, Alex, originally was the theological perspectives versus the pastor up there, right? Is that
I mean, it's like the idea of what do we think it is? Do you think it's the pastors? How do we mark a church by what they believe? Is it the pastors of what they actually are trying to come across, or how that lands with people?
Well, I'll give you a quote from old Scott Westering at PLU. What you say followed by what you do is what you believe, right? So then it kind of gets into, right? It gets into what we were talking about, right? Like with the actions, right? And then intention. And yeah, I think that it does, like, it first starts with, you know, from the pulpit. It first starts with the pastor, and I think the pastor sets the tone for, you know, what happens in the church, really. So, you know, I think if a pastor is talking more about saying, really even questioning like the meaning of God, or like, what do we really think God is, right? Do we think God is the space dwelling personified figure who has feelings and emotions, and based on the Old Testament has good days and bad days? Or is God the force, like the life force throughout all of us, right? Kind of some of those Gnostic teachings that were, you know, kind of more apocryphal, right? So I think that there's a balance of the pastor setting the tone, right? A leader sets the tone. And I think that from church to church, you can get that different tone. And then obviously the pastor is going to be influenced by, I think that there's a difference in a church when a pastor is truly influenced by hardcore scholarly theology, and essentially kind of the McDonald's version theology, as far as like what we, like, just the Americanized. I feel like there's an Americanized theology, and I feel like there's just kind of more of a substance theology that exists, my opinion. And I do believe that the
It also
pastor
goes
sets the
from
tone.
religion to religion as well, because I mean, we're talking at a pastoral level, which is very community based, but if you're talking at like a church hierarchical level, you know, with the recent change from Francis over to the new Pope, that represents, you know, a shift in how the church operates and how the church thinks, right? Um, for example, like Francis never stayed in the papal apartments his entire time the Pope. He believed that they were too austere and magnificent, so he never stayed there. But now the new Pope has moved into the new papal apartments, and so he's set a precedent now where he doesn't really care about the look of how that, you know, that is, and is kind of returning to church norms, as it were. So like that's a political movement. A lot of people take it as, which even something as simple as where the guy sleeps.
Yeah, I mean, and I think of it too. Like, I would say that a lot of my views, like, I can't put Catholics into a lot of like my opinions of what I think about church, because they just simply disagree far more than, like, if I'm talking about hell and a good person and how we get there. Like, I think it was Francis that was like, yeah, your grandma who was a good person, like, yes, you will see her there. Like, they're not going to have this same viewpoint as that. But I guess where I was going, and maybe I'll push it a little bit, is that the best example I can think of between the disagreement between the congregants, the church people that go there, and the actual pastors is like the Zionist movement and the rapture and dispensational theology.
Left
That
Behind books, all
the
that.
Left Behind books, like that theology of the rapture is like not widely held by biblical scholars or like pastors. Like, it's Dallas Theological Seminary and like maybe another Baptist, the Southern Baptist movement maybe, but like that's not a widely held belief. But from a scholarly or pastor standpoint, but I would say the vast majority of Christians probably still hold to some kind of rapture theology. And so like that's where I would go to say like the example, and I do think it maybe leaks into things more than we might think, of that there's a disconnect between what the pastor and or the pastors are trying to push forward, or biblical scholars would think, and then like your average everyday evangelical Christian.
Yeah, I think that disconnect is getting wider and wider as we get more and more young, you know, up and coming church groups and pastors that are kind of disconnected and born in that disconnect and raised in that disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah, or pastors without theological training too.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I don't want to get too high and mighty here, but it's there's something to be said for like the training, right? Like there's something to be said for knowing about the Council of Nicaea. There's something to be said for knowing what happened. Like, how did we get the canon? There's something to be said for learning about all that, not just, oh, it you know, if it's not in here or if you believe it, you're going to hell, kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
It's
I would
like,
argue it's bigger than something to be said. I would argue it's fundamental. it's,
yeah.
it's one of those things where like a lot of people they pick up a book and they read it and they think it's law, but they don't know how it was constructed. It's shocking when you do one of those like Jimmy Kimmel style on the street kind of rough interviews with a random passerby, and you'd be shocked to realize how few people know anything about the Bible or biblical studies.
Yeah, or and stuff like the rapture that like most people just think is true, but like it's not found in scripture. Like, it's a couple random verses in like First Thessalonians or something. Like, it's hard to find.
Very loose
It's the Schofield
interpretation.
Bible and John Darby.
Yeah. Yeah. And so a couple things I want to ask you here too. So what this is kind of going to be a two-part question because based on what you just said, but I'll start with this one. What does the phrase red hat versus red letter Christian mean to you?
Yeah, and this is I don't think I've heard that before, but it is like an interesting thing to think about. And I would say, you know, it's the disconnect between like these Make America Great Again Christians and the words of Jesus, and there's like a clear disconnect there. I also think that there's a clear disconnect for me in my more liberal leaning theology that could be found too. And I think it can go back to like the means of how we get there. Like, we would both again, I look at things and try to find the middle ground for it. So where can I find the middle ground with those red hat, like Make America Great Again, conservative Christians? Because I think that there's middle ground to be had. It's the same thing with like the food stamps that we mentioned earlier. Like, okay, so we can at least agree that Jesus talks about caring for the poor and the widow and the least of these. Now we're going to disagree on the means and how we get there. But let's at least start on that common ground, and then we can start to like have the discussion of what that looks like. Because I think a lot of the times, like, I'm far more concerned of what the outcome is. And I think if we can start to get each other there, then there's something to be had. I will say, when everything was happening with January 6th, and the Christians all thought that Trump was still going to be president, I put out there on the good old Facebook that I would make a bet for anyone that wanted to, because I would say my sphere of influence is evangelical Christians. Like, I would say, throw a hat at my friends list, or throw a dart at my friends list. You're going to hit a Christian on there. And so, yeah, I threw it out there. Anyone thinks Trump's still going to be president? Let's get a tattoo. I'll bet a tattoo, and I'll get Trump 2020, bald eagle, American flag, the whole thing. If he becomes president, and I'm good with that. But if not, they had to get a Biden-Harris tattoo. And what that started as is kind of a joke. Someone took me up on it, and we talked, and we still talk. And he's down to get the tattoo, surprisingly. But it actually, it became a conversation where something could, take place that we, at the end of it, found middle ground more than there was at the beginning. And at one point, he said that I was the definition of a bad person. So to go to actually have a conversation from that was helpful, I think.
I know what you're saying, because we had on a guest a couple weeks ago, Zachary Faust. I don't know if you got a chance to see any of those clips or listen to that episode, but one thing that he likes to talk about is that, right, like, when you're talking politically with the MAGA movement and everything, right? And like, I voted for Trump the first time. I didn't the second 2 times he ran, but I did the first time. And me and others in the MAGA movement, I feel like the whole thing was trying to find, right, like, we were sold on the idea of draining the swamp, right? So like, bridging the gap between those people who might not have voted the same way I did, right? Like, and what Zach pointed out last week was that, like, even though you may not agree with those people right now and what they're doing, is that the original intention was that they wanted to drain the swamp. Like, the original intention was they wanted to do something good. They thought that's like the very definition of evil, right? Is like, evil people don't think they're evil, right? Like, it's everyone thinks that they're doing good, right? So it's trying to, right? You said over January 6th, you've had interactions with this person that have been good, that have happened afterwards, just from starting up a conversation, right? And that's the whole
I always
reason
had
that we started this thing.
annoyance during the 2016 campaign of Donald Trump when he rose to power with the drain the swamp mantra, because it's when you look at like especially now with federal workers not getting paid for what, going on 4 weeks, the government's been shut down, and how the right is just reveling in the fact that, oh, now we could fire more government workers. And it's like, when you look at that and you think of like this drain the swamp mantra that they've been running with for the past 12 years in the American political system, it's kind of crazy, because those are people. Those are people that have jobs, that are trying to work for their communities, their constituencies, their the citizens like yourselves. And it was kind of always interesting to me when people would be like, we got to drain the swamp. And it's like, who convinced you that there is a swamp? Like, who convinced you that group of people is bad? It was from the very beginning, the mindset of that whole mantra was baffling to me, because it was just like, what has the federal workforce done that is bad, that you can put your finger on in that sense?
Well, yeah, and what I would think towards too is there's a clip that I see every time I try to just sit and watch it, of John McCain being asked a question. Is like,
we're scared We're scared of an Obama presidency, and I'll tell you why. I'm concerned about someone that cohorts with domestic terrorists such as heirs.
I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as President of the United States. Now, look, I
got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not.
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
We both think that America's great and the vessel to get there. We just disagree with how that happens. And so I think in the same sense, they're like the swamp. Like, if we just change our mindset for how we're talking about that swamp, like, I think that it changes a lot of the political discourse on it, and go like, okay, what do you mean when you say that? Like, can we actually have a conversation and discuss it? And that's where I go back to, like, where I think the church can be really good, is because it can, when you don't have those like us versus them thing, like you have to be this way and think this way to be in here, then you gather a bunch of people that have completely different viewpoints and think differently. And there's me who's 35 or however old I am, and there's a guy that's 70, and you're in the same like Bible study or community group together, and you have different perspectives, and you're living a completely different life that normally you guys wouldn't interact all that much. And so you can have those like hearing a different perspective because you have common ground in one thing.
For sure.
I guess I just get worried when I hear like of mega churches that like kind of advise their constituents or their congregations on how to vote. And
I think it's disgusting.
Yeah, it's when you see the size and outreach that a lot of these people have, and then a lot of that like mega donor money from these churches, like I brought up Kenneth Copeland, for example, but I forgot there was that one woman. She was just in the news for a meeting that they did over in Israel, and she was Trump's largest single private donor on his 2024 campaign. Miriam Atwell, something like that. And she got all of her money from the United States churching organizations, and she's the largest private funder for donations to the state of Israel. And so it's like, well, how are you an American evangelical Christian nationalist?
Yeah.
but your money and donations goes to the state of Israel. Like, how does that work? And like then you help get elected Donald Trump, who famously was like, oh, what's your favorite Bible phrase or Bible quote? And he's like, oh, they're all too personal to me. I can't tell you. Like,
that's good.
It's again, it's calling someone a fair weather Christian. I call someone a fair weather Christian if they like, their mom breaks their leg and they're like, oh, all of a sudden, I gotta pray tonight. I gotta ask for help on something. I gotta ask for guidance on something in a mental way. That they're only doing it because they had that bad thing happen, right? Donald Trump is further than a fair weather Christian, and a lot of these voters too, these evangelical voters in the United States, they're using Christianity as a means to enforce what they see as the doctrine for the world. Yes. And I personally think that doctrine is white and supportive of a lot of political ideals, concerning abortion, voting rights, marriage rights, same sex and inter racial marriage rights as well are now kind of back under the scope. Even Clarence Thomas just announced that he wants the United States to look back on the same sex marriage laws that the United States has. And it's just
I think like it's every group is going, and everyone has used the Bible to justify their own means of power that they want to put in place. I mean, it's happened with slavery, it's happened with gay rights, it's happened with abortion, and they're just going to use, if it's not the church, if for whatever reason religion wasn't there would be another means that they would use to steer towards their like political agenda that would take place. So
but religion occupies a very a very higher power, in a lot of people's mindsets, because
Exactly.
it's sacrifice over to something greater, and then you combine the fact that they
It's
have
the
these
big T
special
truth.
powers, and
Yeah,
and you
capital
combine
T
the fact that
truth,
they
yeah.
have special powers in the United States, where they're a tax exempt
Yeah.
organizations, and so they can reach a lot further. You look at APAC, for example, in the United States. The APAC doesn't have to follow a lot of the same laws because of it's not considered a foreign donations organization. It's considered an American religion, organization that focuses on the American religion connections with Israel. Increasing that connection based with the United States and Israel, but it's not a foreign domestic international relationship. It's a religious relationship.
So I wanted to real quick, Randall, we talked about this in, I think our third episode, fourth episode? I can't remember when we talked about it, but how we saw, or you expressed in your church growing up, that you guys had like a satellite program with churches in Israel or places in Israel, and how we even talked about stories of the Bible being told to us by vegetables. So I wanted to play I wanted to play a clip here real quick,
Please.
because I think that it's just something that I know that all of us have seen it.
If you didn't learn about the story of David via tomato and cucumber, you're not a real American Christian.
Yeah, are you even an evangelical?
I don't know where my hairbrush is.
Do we? Have I ever told you about the Israelites?
The Israelites. Oh yeah, I remember those guys. Weren't they supposed to be God's chosen people?
That's what the Bible says.
Oh, I bet they always followed God's directions.
Ho, ho, ho! You'd think so, wouldn't you?
And so then, Alex, my next question for you is, do you remember in your church, was there any kind of Zionist, essentially some kind of stuff with Israel and whitewashing that you remember with Israel in the church growing up?
Yeah, and this is kind of what I alluded to earlier. I actually don't think there was from the pulpit. I can never think of a time that's what was taking place from the pulpit. But I would say that almost every person that went there would hold that belief. That would hold like this rapture theology that, the state of Israel is like the actual, place that we need to keep sacred. But like, again, like that's from a dispensational view and theology that I would be very surprised if that church that I went to growing up, and the church, like I planted a church. You start a new church, they call it a plant. Started a new church, and like I know that they didn't hold that. They hold like covenant theology that would not say that land has any like sacred thing, or the exact people is God's chosen people. So again, yeah, I think that it was probably not from the pulpit, but was a widely held belief through the congregation.
And being that we did grow up in the same place, such a widely held belief that was fascinating, that because I didn't really remember anything from the pulpit, but I remember it being a theme that was so strong that it's like, where did it come from? Did it all come from, right, like that Left Behind study, and that it was like that seed that was planted in like the mid 90s?
Yeah.
Well, for it to be really modern,
Left Behind, the Satanic Panic, like similar means that come through culture, through Christian culture, that I don't think is like a widely held theological belief.
I think it might be Occam's razor is the simplest explanation, is always often the most likely, and I think that maybe in the 90s. A lot of American Christians, specifically the younger trained ones who would be the ones that were left to deal with the kids at like the daycare kind of thing, or the Sunday school kind of stuff. I feel like maybe they weren't as well taught in how to handle the sensitive topic that is the Jewish Christian axiom. And it's one of those things where like maybe in the 90s they didn't want to be so anti-Jewish, coming out of the World War II, just 40 years prior, 30 years prior. And so they kind of wanted to shed Israeli history, Jewish history in a positive light. And at the same time, they have to sell some part of Jewish history to teach their own history about, early days of Christianity. But I was definitely, like, in my congregations, growing up in Southern California, San Marcos Lutheran Church, I was definitely taught that the Israelis were the chosen people, and they had a special relationship with God that I can't have. But that's okay, because we have our own, and that's where then Christianity would go off. But like we had a sister church, a synagogue in Israel, in Tel Aviv, that we would like write letters with, and I had like a pen pal even that was like my pen pal in Israel. I should hit that kid up. I just thought of that. That's a great idea. Oh, I gotta find that. Oh, I'm gonna look into that. Yeah, so I had a pen pal even, and like I remember when I was in high school, like we would do like history, of the Holocaust and history of Judaism, and I felt I knew more about it because I was raised in a Christian church, which is
interesting.
kind of baffling to think about.
What's funny about that too, though, is that, right, like I kind of think we're dancing a little bit around. I feel like sometimes when the Zionist narrative was pushed, you could maybe think of the church maybe being a little bit more conservative in their values, which is funny then, because, right, like, if it's brimstone and fire for those out of the club, then how does this special relationship even exist? And that's what always confused me, is like, well, what are we? And that's kind of what first got me thinking too. It's like, well, from getting these Judeo Christian messaging, it's like, well, there's two paths, but then there's also brimstone and fire. So it's like that in and of itself is not, like, that idea does not match, right? So, and then Alex leads me to another question that we kind of talked a little bit about off camera, and is where we found out we had some stuff in common. Why do you think that so many, we could call Christian nationals, are so quick to support organizations like ICE or other authoritarian practices that would be in direct opposition to Jesus's teachings, but maybe not to Pauline doctrine?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes into what I think is culture. I think if I would talk to a conservative Christian that would go towards ICE, it would be more along the lines of like us versus them, and what are we going to emphasize? Because it's going to be a needs of like security and protect, and then they're going to
Roman scriptures being quoted, and
yeah, like, you're going to be like, well, we need to, there's government and we need to be of support of it. But I think at the end of the day, I think that more comes down to, it's us versus them. It's my security for my family. And that's my like agenda that I'm going to read in. And then in the same sense that everyone's always done, they're going to take that and they're going to use the scripture to back up their personal point of view, however they want to do that. So again, I think it's like a means necessary of what anyone is going to, what I will do too, in some sense, of finding a piece of scripture that's going to support my already political bias and use it to my advantage.
For sure.
But I think more so what I have seen is like you need to like obey the government authority in some sense. But I haven't seen anything more along the lines of like we're going to support a specific removing like illegal immigrants. I think again it goes towards more of their overall worldview, that it's us versus them, and I'm going to protect my own. And in order to do that, that's something that I'm going to like push out. And then like this narrative of like that illegal immigrants are people that are going to cause harm to me and my family, which I think is a narrative that's actually not accurate. But.
Exactly. It's such a stark contrast, right, to see someone who might say on their Facebook bio or something, the first thing that they mention is Christian, and then the next thing that they say is support your local ICE raids. So it's just, I personally cannot reconcile that fact. Right. I mean, if you want to pull scripture about, taking care of the least among you, right? And taking care of the immigrant, right? Like still having room within society to do that. So it's
Yeah,
just, I have a hard time
and
reconciling that.
and for me, it's like the glaring, like that those things are the same. Like I'm going to put that in my bio and I support ICE. Like those things are probably going to be similar at like a disgustingly high level. And that's the thing that's like hard for me to understand. Like
You generally
why are those
know
things correlated?
the people that put that type of like moniker in their bio are full of shit, like just immediately, because that's just something that not a real Christian wouldn't do. You know what I mean? Like that's so unchristian just from the very beginning. It's just to show it off on your chest like you're better than everyone else. It's, if anything, it's those people that want to be seen are the majority of the people that I feel like is wrong with modern day Christianity. Is it's become a cult of culture rather than like a place of self betterment.
Yeah. And I would ask, like, what is a real Christian? You said that person isn't a real Christian. What would we categorize as a real Christian?
Someone who holds their ideals over their sense of nationalism or their voting structure. You know, someone who has a sense of with own found morals that aren't in always seeking like popular culture or popular approval for. Someone who's willing to do something unpopular because it's the morally, objectively, correct choice. And I feel like with the majority of the people who put that moniker on their title, it really just should say hypocrite.
Someone who, Alex, we talked about this off camera, but right, someone who follows the red letters versus maybe the Pauline scripture that comes after that. We found out that we have a connection in common from college. Would you care to elaborate a little bit on what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. So, and I wish I remembered exactly what I was quoting, but I took a class, Professor Z, who he taught religion at UW, and then went over to PLU as well, and
Which is where I had him. Yep.
yeah, which at one point I quoted something to him in class, and he said, "That's okay, Alex. I'll take Jesus. You can take Paul." And I remember like sitting there thinking, I can't remember exactly what the quote was or the verse that I quoted to him, but just going like, man, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Like, I think so much of evangelical Christianity has been framed around taking Paul's letters and framing Jesus's theology off of Paul, rather than having Jesus's theology and what we see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and have that frame the way that we look at Paul. And so I think that I've been, obviously, maybe not obviously, but I've been guilty of that, and trying to think of like, how can the way of Jesus more shape my life, and looking at it through his lens, and rather than trying to fit Paul's theology back into what Jesus says. And I would say like the Acts 29 network, and like a big part of the evangelical culture that I grew up in, that's how that they would frame it. They would go back and look and say, all right, like the story of the Good Samaritan that I referenced earlier, they're like, the real point of the story of the Good Samaritan is the gospel in that. The gospel, as in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, is the point of the Good Samaritan, that we're the ones in the ditch, and Jesus is the Good Samaritan that takes us and brings us out of that. But if we look at that context, like I highly doubt that's what Jesus is getting at to this story as he's telling it, that he's saying that, yes, one day I'm going to die and raise from the dead. Like that, yeah. I just don't, I think we're missing Jesus's context in that by trying to read Paul.
To highlight what you said too, John, earlier, where people don't know, their own histories of like the Council of Nicaea or anything. A lot of people probably don't know that Paul had nothing to do with Jesus. Paul and Jesus never met.
They never met.
Paul and Jesus, they didn't know each other.
No.
I think there was a fairly significant amount of time between Paul and Jesus too. It was like 60 years or so.
51 years.
51 years. Bam! Come on, I got that off the top of my head, dog.
51 years.
But what he would say is that Jesus came as a lowly man such as me, because he sees the vision of Jesus coming to him.
Yeah, and
and when he defines the gospel, that's what he said. He said that Jesus died and rose again, and then
he
came
didn't
as a
witness
lowly
it
man
himself.
such as me.
And he didn't witness
True.
it himself,
he
which gives
also
him
had
more
a
power. Yes.
he also had a coming to Jesus moment that was so powerful that chained him from being a Jewish hierarchical figure to a new Christian, new born again Christian. But at the same time, you could make the argument then, if we're gonna, we want to focus on Jesus, we want to focus on Jesus's message, not Paul's message, because I personally believe Paul's message was bought and paid for and cut and scripted so be able to be marketed to these other communities around the Mediterranean. But you have to remember too, though, Jesus had 12 disciples. Jesus had people in his group as well as non numbered disciples, but named followers. There were plenty of people that could have continued his own preachings on. But I feel like when you're trying to attack a religion from, not you specifically, but when Jesus is trying to attack a religion, as he was, because he was pointing out the flaws in the Judean religion at the time, he created something, and then other people were able to ride that wave and kind of steer it and add some curbs to to change the direction, as it were, to what the message was. But it's important to distinguish that Jesus and Paul don't, like, I don't feel Paul's able to speak for Jesus, because again,
Randall,
he
I'm
wasn't there.
going to play a clip here that I think talks a little bit more about the implications of what that really means. Let me play this.
Pastor probably doesn't believe in God. Let me explain what I mean. I went to college about 15 years ago to get my bachelor's and master's in historical Christian theology. I grew up as a Pentecostal pastor's kid. I've been around this thing my whole life. And one of the things I learned that really blew my mind is that the God most Christians worship today was, for lack of a better way of saying it, kind of invented in the late medieval period. See, there's a big difference in thought between what we conceive of as God today and what most Christians throughout history before that period, how they understood God and what they viewed him to be. And the mistake isn't just conceptual. I think it's actually leading us down the road to fascism. So if you understand the way that the early church thinkers from the first century through up about the late medieval period, the way they understood God was not as a being who existed, who was good. They thought of God as the ground of being, existence itself, goodness itself, as that divine force in which all living things live and move and have their being, which all creation exists in and through this God. And even calling him or talking about him in anthropological terms was understood just as metaphorical ways that we could understand God. Their understanding of God in the early church was rooted in like a Neoplatonic understanding of God. But because of some theological innovations, like by people like John Duns Scotus and William of Ockham in the late medieval period, we began to think of God more anthropomorphically. And we started to really just worship a projection of our own ego and cultural identities out onto space, and then called it God. And the difference, the shift here, what it's done is it's taken our world that is permeated and infused with divine presence and essence. See, they viewed God as the substance through which all things live and move and have their being, kind of like a divine force field, so to speak. And that made the world a magical place. It made nature sacred. But what happened is when we recreated God in our own image and we turned God into a being, albeit the most good and wise and strong and powerful being, what happened is we stripped the earth, we stripped the world of its divine infusion, and we turned it into just, resources to be extracted, something to be acted upon. When we view God as subject, the world loses all of its meaning and value. And this is kind of taking us to a place in our society, in our culture, where you might be calling yourself a Christian, but really the way you view the world is closer to nihilism. And so your pastor might not really believe in God, at least not God in the classical Christian sense. Really, it's more post-Christian. I'll talk more about.
So kind of how, when we're talking about Paul and how that can interact with Jesus's teachings, I feel for me personally is that when you focus too much on when you focus too much on the actual passion of the Christ, I think that it kind of takes something away from the teachings that Jesus actually did while he was here, right? When you focus too much on the passion and you focus too much on the death and the resurrection, that it kind of takes away from the ideas that he was spreading, right? He's spreading this with the backdrop of him being raised in the Jewish tradition, and how he then, if you believe him to be the Son of God, he is anointed and he is spreading the word, right? And how the word was what, like, the messages and the teachings were all that the people had, right? They didn't have the religion. They didn't have the passion at that point. The passion is something that's later, right? It's his death and resurrection, pointing to him being the Son of God, because you can touch him, see him, feel him, he's resurrected. But you almost lose sight of then, like, what was he here to do, right? Like, what was he saying when he was here, right? So I think that that interacting with Paul is kind of a reason why I think a lot of churches today, it's like, how can you get a Christian nationalist movement from a Christian church? And I think that it even goes back to the start. It goes back to the inception of that.
I watched a video recently that was talking about how the use of ecclesiastical Latin in the Christian church was like the first derailment from like real hard derailment from the original Christ's teachings, because like that's when it would, like, specifically even in biblical doctrine, you have Jesus going into several different people's homes and preaching, the word and having gospel and having interactions and giving insight on situations. But like you'd be kind of outpressed nowadays, or even during that period after the establishment of ecclesiastical Latin, to have the church come in your home to help you for a situation. You'd rather you come to the church, you know what I mean? And that's right there is where I feel like a lot of the self-individual, the self-citizens connection with the ethereal was split. And that was, I feel like, done for money, because it kept the poor from having to be able to read the Bible. It kept the poor from being able to have that direct relationship with God. And so then you have these communities get centered around the church, and all through, like he was just saying in that video, all through the medieval period, what the thought of what a Christian God was kind of changed, and that was a byproduct of this establishment, in my mind, of the use of Latin and getting away from the Roman vernacular at the time.
Yeah. Well,
But
and
like,
I don't
show though, like, how many different times are we going to have the Bible been printed in how many different languages? I mean, even my own religion was established just because there was a pissed off German who wanted to print the Bible in German. And
Yeah, but I mean, to use like the language that they use, which I think is sometimes hits with evangelicals, to use their language. Like, we make God in our image. Like, I make God in my image. You guys make God in your image. Like, we have our biases that we're going to use. And so I think it's easier when we point out those biases of what we have and go, okay, these are my biases. This is how I'm going to try my own way to make God in my image. And I think that's, like, as we look back, like what you guys are saying, is it's showing that we've made God in our image. Like, when we look at the scriptures and it talks about holy, it's like holy, holy, holy is like what the angels are crying out. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It means set apart, set apart, set apart. Why do we think that we can put God in this box and say we're no longer setting him apart as like different from us, but we're like, okay, we've decided this is who God is, instead of being like, no, we can't like understand him. So we can understand parts of it because we say, okay, now Jesus comes down and is God's image to earth. He's the image of the invisible God, is what Colossians says. And we see that, but like this God that's like outside of us, I don't understand. Like, we keep trying to be able to put him in a box and say, okay, I understand who God is now, but it's just a creation of our own image of what we think he is.
I always thought that's a very good point, and I completely agree with that. I always thought, though, it was interesting with how we deify and look to the teachings of Jesus as something to live our lives by, and we don't know the entirety of his life. I always thought that was really interesting. For a large majority of his life, I think there's more years we don't know about than the years we do know about with his stories.
Theorized that he went to the East and studied under Buddhism and went to Egypt, Coptic Cairo, all that stuff. So
yeah, I've actually heard
that's more along the lines of heresy, though, right? Like I don't know if. Well, so here's the thing, though, is I mean the lost years, right? How many years was it? 13.
Well, there was like 13 or 16 years. There's a story that I heard. So there's a biblical archaeologist who was really popular in the early 2000s. He's out of Toronto. He's Jewish. His name is Simha Yakupovich. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Simha. Simha is really interesting. He had a TV show on Canadian television where he would go to Israel and go to some sites in the the Lebanon and Jordan and Egypt, and he would do archaeology, and it was always really fascinating because you get raised with these stories, like we were talking earlier, VeggieTales. And you get to see, the construction of the great gates of Megiddo and Hebzor and all these, amazing first century Jewish cities. And then Simha Yakupovich will go there and they have the archaeological site of Megiddo, and so he'll go there and he'll look at this big gate that's written about in the Bible, and it's so amazing and so huge, and it's like 6 feet tall and it's like 13 feet wide. It's very underwhelming, and it just goes to show though how through thousands of years of people talking and telling this story, this gate gets bigger and more grand and more grand, and then when you can apply that to something physical, that's the reason I bring this whole topic up, is when you apply that to something physical like a gate, you can see how things get blown out of proportions. And it was always really fascinating to see in his show because he was Jewish, and there would be people on his show even that would get very upset with the things that he would bring to the forefront, because it would just should go to show that a lot of it just gets blown out of proportion. But the reason I bring him up in the whole thing with the missing years is he has a documentary that is pretty well produced, and I believe James Cameron of Titanic fame produced it. And it's all about, in his missing years, he was the beginning of his baptistry, and he was trying to start his coalition of the willing, if you wish to call it. And he did a
call
a
it another C word if you wanted to. Back
he did a trip to Spain, and that's where a lot of the stories come in for like Jesus calming the sea and stuff like that. Like oh well, that took place on the Sea of Galilee. It's like, until you realize first century boats in the Sea of Galilee didn't have extra cabins, and there was no below decks and things like that. Those were on seafaring vessels at the time, so that would have been in the Mediterranean. And there's a bunch of stories that can kind of make sense. And then there's actually first century history too that says that he was in southern Spain during the time. Like even people there will say, yeah, he was in Spain, and the whole reason it never made the Bible is because the people in Spain threw him out. They thought he was full of crap. Not at all. Like it was a lost missionary trip to Spain, and so they didn't want to include that bit in the Bible, so it was taken out during the Council of Nicaea, and that's why it just is completely like someone picked up a chapter and got rid of his life.
Right, and what you're hitting at is essentially what we talked about before, is like right from the pulpit, we're hoping that our pastors have been trained in these studies, right? We're hoping that they haven't got the kind of light diet version of, it's divine inspired, that's it, whatever. It's like, well, there's a lot of history that goes into that. There's a lot of history. There's councils. There was, men meeting, right? And so that kind of, when you talk about the influence that you can see through and in the scripture, right? If you've studied theology, you more than likely have studied the idea of Q or quell, right? The
Q theory, yeah.
The Q theory, right, is that it's pretty much all of the Gospel of Mark is Q, other than the resurrection, interestingly enough. So Q is in Mark, and then it's found in the other Gospels other than John. And then also, then you get the same Q influence, though, is found within the Gospels of Philip and Thomas, which they unearthed back in the 1940s, that went underground in around 350, which is right before the Council of Nicaea. Right. So, and that's kind of where
for the listeners that don't know, the Q is basically a pre-written gospel that all other gospels were then written off of. The gospels, I think, span Alex, you might know more than me because for some reason I
Matthew,
feel like
Mark,
you
Luke,
would.
and John.
Well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's I think I want to say like 82 years between the start of when the first gospel was written and then when the end of the last gospel was finished.
That tracks. It sounds.
Yeah,
right.
there was a long period of time between that, and Mark is the oldest gospel, and it's retelling. The gospels are retelling the same story just by 4 different authors, and they were all working off of an original source that we no longer have.
Other
and
than
that original
John,
source
John
is
was
called the
not.
Q.
John was not written off of Q. It was, all of Mark they believe is Q inspired. Like I said, other than the resurrection, which they believe the resurrection story in Mark was added quite a bit later. But so, what's interesting though is that when they unearthed these documents back in the 40s, is that they also have the Q influence, right? So it's like, why then? When men in power were the reason for Nicaea, right? Constantine was called Nicaea. Right. So then it brings into what I believe, which is really heresy, to be honest, which is the Gospels of Philip and Thomas, is that the divine spark is within you, right? That the kingdom of heaven is within, right? And that's kind of essentially what Jesus was here to do, was to awake the divine spark, right? But I'm just some woo-woo heretic. But the Q influence is found in those doctrines or in those Gospels. So yeah, kind of crazy to think about what's included and what's not and why. Okay, Alex, one more hot take. Hot take, you ready?
Let's go.
Flip one table. Where are you flipping it at? Flip one table, buddy.
Oh, man, it depends on the day. Because it's hard. Man, today my flipping tables, I know
I put you on the spot.
I don't have a good take on this. This is the one that I've been trying to think of, and I was assuming that as we went through this, I was going to have my take.
Well, I will.
Where am I going to flip tables?
I'll tell you mine.
Yeah, give me some time.
I'll give you some time. I'm essentially flipping tables with, essentially, if you're someone who's in power of the flock and your first words are not to the red letters, or your first words are not to essentially the core tenets of Jesus's teachings, right? It's why I kept bringing up Jesus versus Paul. It's why I kept bringing up these ideas that are important to me, and what made me skeptical with growing up in the church, right? Is like, if that is not the core tenet of what we believe, then it's just fucking flip it, man. Like it's was taking care of the poor, the downtrodden, the least of these among you. It's just, that's what, to me, and I know that I don't do the best job in acting it out either, but I'm also not pretending. I'm also not, I don't want to say pretending. I'm also not the one who's going out and telling people what to do with the word. So that's just a general speaking. If that's not what's happening, I'm flipping that table. So
I got it. Here's my table to flip. Is anything where it links a tithe or a gift to then receiving something. Anything where it is give and then you'll get. And I think I can even put that towards going beyond tithes, which is the thing that pisses me off the most, but also in a sense of like, you need to pray more and then God will give you more. Yeah, do better, and then God's gonna bless into your life more. I think any of that theology, and I would say that actually the majority of evangelical churches don't believe that way, but then that is once again where I would say, like, what's the congregants, what does the actual church, the people that sit in the pews, believe versus what does the pastor think? Because I think the pastor would say, yeah, you don't give to get back, the majority of them, because grace is a free gift from Jesus, and so we don't need to give anything to get back from him. But
yeah,
those are the tables I'm flipping.
Famously, Christianity is not a meritocracy. You don't get the most out of it if you put the most in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My table to flip in honor of flipping tables and all would just be general usury. I feel like a lot of, and that doesn't go to a economical sense, but to a political sense, to a relationship and sociological sense. I feel like a lot of people in this country, commit, like you were just saying, Alex, they do things for the sake of being seen to be doing it, or for the reward that they get for doing it. And that investment shouldn't be, so you can get your return. It should be for the betterment of everyone. And so like when we bring up the table flipping, parable to begin with, it's interesting because that took place in a church where there was a corruption from within. And that's what was seen, and that's what was done. And so it's, when you look at the United States churches and the political messages that are coming out of a lot of them, I feel is entirely improper, and it's usury of the congregations. You're betraying the trust that's put into your role when you bring up politics and preach political messages to a congregation rather than a religious one, and one looking to betterment your community rather than to inflict some change.
Yeah, rent-seeking behavior, for lack of a better term, as well. Not to get too commie on you guys, but yeah. Well, awesome. That is our podcast for today. Thanks for tuning in to the Knights of the Wrong Table. Alex, special thanks to you. I know that you put a lot, you put your heart out on the line for being
thanks,
here
Alex.
today.
Thanks a lot.
So we really appreciate that, because I think it's important to talk about this, especially in the political landscape that is today, right? Yeah. And you're definitely a great human being, and we really appreciate you coming on here and telling your story and sharing with our listeners. So
yeah, guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Tune in next week. We'll see you folks later.